Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining this afternoon. Certainly appreciate your flexibility in this virtual event that we'll be having today. I do hope one of these years we get back to in person, not to be right now, but we definitely have a lot of good content lined up for you, starting with one of my favorite events from each year, the CIO panel. We have collected several CIOs from the banking industry that we believe have some unique perspectives and some very interesting projects and strategic efforts that they've worked on recently, and have brought them together to share some of those perspectives with you. The overall theme of our panel today is going to be essentially digital transformation of your bank, but not digital transformation for the sake of technology, digital transformation for the sake of strategy. How can you best leverage the IT function within your bank, the capabilities of new and evolving technologies to better serve the needs of your customers, to better serve the needs of your bank as an institution? So we really want to dive into the strategy aspect of how IT leadership can bring you forward and modernize your institutions. Without further ado, I don't want to take any more time on the introductions. I will ask our panelists to introduce themselves. We have today Jay Balsara, Peter Morales, Dan DaCosta, and Dan Serafin. Two Dans to make it a little more confusing when we ask questions and go around. But let's start with just very brief introductions from each of our panelists. I'll go in the order I see you on my screen. So Peter, if you want to get us started.
Sure. So I'm Peter Morales. I am the Senior Vice President for Technology and Innovation at Country Bank in Ware, Massachusetts. My background is I have a doctorate in computer science, master's in engineering management, a bachelor's of science in electrical engineering. Worked for years at NYU, still teach in 2 master's programs there. Prior to that, I was with the New York Stock Exchange, American Stock Exchange, and I started developing diagnostic systems for the F-18. That's as short as I can make it.
Very impressive. Thank you, Peter. Let's move to Dan DaCosta.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. Dan DaCosta. I'm the Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer for Bay Coast Bank in Southern Massachusetts and Rhode Island. I have been at this bank since I was 17 years old. I have a bachelor's from UMass Dartmouth in Information Systems, Business Management. And I essentially came up through the ranks here. I started off as an intern, worked my way up through IT, and became CIO just about 6 years ago now. So it's been kind of a journey.
Thank you, Dan. Dan Serafin.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for having me for this great event. My name is Dan Serafin. I'm the CIO at Savers Bank. We're a bank about 20 miles west of Worcester, Massachusetts, Central Mass. We're about $600 million in assets, 6 branches, and about 95 employees. I have 7 years of direct banking experience and over 20 years of financial services experience, all in IT. And I have a bachelor's degree from the University of Massachusetts Lowell.
Thank you, Dan. Last but not least, Jay.
Thank you again for the opportunity here. Jaydeep Balsara. I work with Columbia Bank, which is the only bank here in New Jersey on this panel. So I'm definitely thank you for the opportunity. I've generally worked in the technology industry for about 20 odd years. I am working at Columbia Bank as the head of digital, and I do report up to my CIO here at the bank. Again, I've done my master's from Rutgers University, and I have a bachelor's in finance. So that's about me.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, everyone. We'll get started right into it. We have about 40 more minutes, so we won't waste any time. We'll dive into the questions. As I mentioned, the overall theme of this panel is going to be using technology to modernize and advance your business and your strategy. Whenever we have these types of conversations, it inevitably comes back around to the core service provider. And they're in many ways the gatekeeper of what you can and can't do from a technology strategy. I'd like to get started by talking about that. And in particular, what has been your experience with your core provider and the level of support they're giving you to integrate, whether it's fintechs or startups or any sort of boundary pushing technology? So maybe Peter, if you'd like to get us started with that conversation.
Sure. We've actually had a pretty good experience with our core provider. I don't know if I can mention vendor names or not on the panel, but it's one that I think most folks would be familiar with. The experience with them initially, I think we had to kind of establish a dialogue and find the right people to engage, but they've been very supportive. In fact, our strategy ties in well with their strategy, which is they are now, it seems to be focusing more on the core and less on the peripheral applications. So they've exposed a lot of APIs. We've also built a middleware approach to integrating with those APIs. So rather than doing direct point-to-point integrations, we do it through a middleware service-oriented architecture that allows us to see a lot of the traffic and actually even transform and translate traffic as it goes through. We're talking to other organizations, Red Canary, about monitoring that traffic and being able to see what's going on, alerting if one of the services goes down. So it actually gives us more visibility, and in some ways can provide us with avenues for verifying what's going through there in ways that we could not with direct point-to-point. So our core provider is supporting that. They have their own version of that. We decided we wanted to be masters of our own destiny, and so we partnered with another company to build our own. But the architecture that we've chosen, I think, really helps us with agility in terms of innovation. So once we have this middleware infrastructure up, it's very easy to connect and just replace connectors if we want to change out a component. Very modular, very component-oriented architecture.
Is it safe to say that you have a best-of-breed approach to the technologies that you use then?
Yes. In fact, and we've heard this from the core provider as well, is that they initially started out by acquiring a lot of ancillary systems that they feel perhaps it's better to create an ecosystem that provides opportunities for others to create and to compete and create best-in-class solutions. And that's what we're after, is let the core be the core and do it to the best that it can, but we can integrate in an agile way with best-in-class. Absolutely.
Excellent. Now, you mentioned API integrations being required. Those, as we're aware, are often difficult to get access to, or else extremely expensive to get access to. I think you mentioned that you have some middleware in place. I believe, Dan Serafin, you also have some similar environments that you've built. Could you expand a little on that?
Yeah, great point. Piggybacking off of Peter's comments, you're absolutely right. The core does a great job. Our core providers do a great job of holding our data and providing it to us and keeping it safe, right? Historically, they provided us, various applications to tie on it, whether it be mobile banking, online banking, whatever the case may be. Today, these APIs are going to give us now the ability to connect, as Peter pointed out, best of breed solutions that meet our specific customers' needs, right? So we're actually in a good spot right now at Savers Bank. We're actually in the midst of a core conversion.
You just muted yourself.
Some of that is the decision on who to select was tied to their ability to provide us access to our data as we need it. It comes down to building good partnerships, right? We're a smaller bank, so the expertise in-house is somewhat limited on the IT side. So having a good partner and building out a middleware solution to pull that data in for both prior day access as well as real-time access, depending on what the transaction or what the request is, right? So, you can partner with a MuleSoft, with Dell Boomi. We're currently using Jitterbit. So there's a lot of tools out there that allow you that capability. So that's kind of the strategy that we're going through. And we do have in our contract, areas that allow us to select best of breed solutions, again, to differentiate ourselves amongst our peers.
Excellent. So you had a contract negotiation that gave you a bit of leverage that many banks may not at the time, but that's good that you were able to get that. Okay. Often when we have these discussions, the conversation is a lot less positive. So certainly I'm glad to hear the reports that were here today. Before we move on, I just want to give either Dan or Jay an opportunity to speak if you have any other thoughts or perspectives on this part of it.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. We're going about it the same strategy as both Dan and Peter. We've put ourselves in the middle, just like Peter said, as a middleware, which gives us the flexibility to work with just about anybody that we want to. If we're able to take in API calls from fintech or whatever system we're working with, make a corresponding call to our core, and then provide that response and filter it and potentially modify it in the process. It gives, just like Dan was just saying, the flexibility with that. It really prepares you for the future and gives you the ability to work with anybody that you want to.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that Dan, Peter, and folks have talked about. For us, I think it was mostly a matter of we are obviously, again, with a core provider. Many times we run into this issue where your core provider is running at a different pace versus what you want to run. And that becomes a little bit of a problem, typically when you're working with fintech vendors, or if you want to onboard a fintech vendor and you want a data or a service available. And like I said, we are on a different maturity scale too, compared to the other folks that have spoken before me. We are still embarking, we've still not embarked, but we are getting onto an API platform, which would help us bridge that, bridge the gap, and then of course provide us the agility and time to market and so forth that we're looking for.
We have one question that I think ties in that we should ask at this point. Several of you mentioned essentially building middleware and making yourself the middle of the API connections. What sort of expertise did you need to bring on to make that realistic? Was it internal or purely someone that you paid to do this for you?
I can jump into that if you like. So we have external partners, and internally we're gearing up our own expertise. So certainly it's not the traditional expertise that you might find in an IT department. So we definitely needed some outside help to do that. But the idea is really to kind of train our folks internally and us be the masters of our own destiny. Again, I'll probably say that multiple times, but to have that level of control so that we can build our own integrations going forward. We're not there yet. We will be there, and we have a lot of very smart, talented people that are chomping at the bit to get in the middle of that.
I think one thing I would add is it would be very important to also understand, based on the maturity and based on what scale of organization you are, how many API services you're going to pretty much leverage. The ROI component comes into the picture very importantly, especially from the leadership. Like, I'm going to invest millions of dollars, what I'm going to get from an API. And so it's very important to understand that part, whether it's good to go with a company like a MuleSoft, or you want to look at somebody else who you can partner with to provide the speed to market and so forth. So very important because there are multiple players in the market.
Very good. All right, I'd like to move on a little bit and talk about the fintechs that we're bringing on, or the other companies and products that we're bringing on into our technology environment. What are you actually trying to accomplish? What strategic goal are they serving? And one of the main things that we hear a lot is data monetization. You have all this data about your customers. What is it that you're trying to accomplish with it? Are you looking to upsell and cross-sell products, or what is the end goal of many of these being the master of your own destiny, as you described, owning your data? What are we trying to do with that?
Yeah, so certainly if you start digging into the data that you have, that I'm sure all of us have access to today, there is a whole lot of information in there that goes beyond what most people just think of as, I have this person's information, I have their contact information, I have, you know, their sensitive information, their tax ID, things like that. But if you have the tools to dig into the transaction level details, it opens up a whole other world of possibilities, because now you're able to identify life events that are happening with this person. You can identify this is where this person normally transacts. You know, so there's just a whole lot of information that's available to you, and it's all actionable. You know, if you have the ability to break that data down, and again, having the appropriate tools, and when I say having the appropriate tools, I don't mean dumping it all into an Excel spreadsheet and having somebody, you know, spend 15 minutes or an hour on it. That's not going to cut it. You have to have something that can aggregate that data, give you trend analysis, you know, CRMs, ETLs, things of that nature. Because if you don't have those tools, you can't properly analyze this information. And you also need the people to do it too. You have to have people who can understand what the, you know, how to come about getting those trends and providing information to you that you can actually make decisions on. But it goes beyond that, because you can actually get into triggering automation with this information. So it's not just about, certainly marketing is absolutely probably the first thing that comes to everybody's mind when you talk about monetizing data. Okay, I learned this about this person, now I can put them into this campaign, or I can reach out to them about this particular event. We do that in a way with our mortgages. We also own a separate insurance company, separate investment company, separate manufactured home loan division. So we leverage that information across the board. So when we see a mortgage that's in process, we say, okay, we're going to reach out 10 days after that person applies for their mortgage. We're going to take the property information, send it to our insurance partner via API, get an automated quote back, and provide that to the person via email, that they can go and they can look at that detailed quote. So it's not just about providing certain information, because if we just reached out to them and said, hey, would you like to open insurance with us? That's not really good enough. It's, here, would you like to open insurance? And here's a quote that's ready and bindable right here at your door, and you didn't even have to ask for it. You know, so being able to automate and trigger workflows off of your data, you know, it opens up a whole world of opportunity.
Great. And I imagine that the limit is however creative you can get with it, honestly, the level of data that you have. But it does bring up another good point. And I have to ask this, I am an auditor. So some of the reasons that we're constrained with the approach to fintech and some of these solutions that you're describing is our requirements as they relate to security, privacy, regulation, those types of concerns. How do you actually go about onboarding a fintech or any other type of company that's going to be providing these types of services? Do you have to make any sort of concessions to your vendor management, your due diligence programs? If not, how do you get through the type of environment that may be less mature in those companies? What does that process look like for each of you? Anyone who'd like to jump in?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So at the end of the day, we own the risk. We as the bank owns the risk. So there's really not much we can do from a standpoint of bypassing or just eliminating specific things that may crop up when you're vetting a new partner. However, I think there are some things that can be done in terms of timing. You know, given the fintech the capability to get certain documentation completed, because a lot of times what I've seen in my role now and my prior role is a lot of times they're not even ready to deal with compliance or an external regulator investigating or examining their platform, right? So some of the approaches that we've taken in the past is providing them compliance as a service. Hey, this is what we have to do from a regulation standpoint as a bank. We need those same expectations met by you as well, and we'll help you along and provide them names of people that they can talk to. So I think those are the key points. But at the end of the day, again, we own the risk. Can't really eliminate those checks and balances, but you can negotiate and work with the fintech to make sure that they're meeting them in a timely manner.
Now, you said that you can help them get there over time, but there's likely to be some period of time, at least, where they may not have the controls in place. Not even the evidence available to you, but just not having the controls in place internally in their environment. Do you have a different level of risk tolerance when you're dealing with these types of companies? Or alternatively, do you have a strategy for any sort of internal risk mitigation that you might be able to do to accept these companies?
Yeah, I'll let the other folks pipe in as well, but from our standpoint, it comes down to, as you mentioned earlier, what is our risk appetite? You know, how bad or how strategic is the solution that they're providing or the service they're providing to our strategy as a whole, and how much risk do we want to tolerate, and what controls can we put in internally to help mitigate some of that risk. So I think that's really, it's an individualized decision, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with Dan. I think similar experience, at least on our side at Columbia. We at least a couple of times a year go through our entire day session where sometimes fintechs come to us and propose their solutions and so forth. We obviously shortlist some of the solutions that they offer, and we obviously send them a package saying that these are all the due diligence requirements that we have. The challenge obviously becomes 9 out of 10 times they don't have the entire compliance requirement they could adhere to. And it then comes down to how critical is that functionality for our business, and can we absorb the risk at that point? That's what it would sometimes come down to. And the business would then have to agree to, I'm okay or not okay, and then go ahead and implement that functionality. But that's kind of our approach many times is, are we ready to take that risk or not?
You know, I would say from our perspective is we don't want to lower our standards, and we really do not want to. So we do try to help the vendors reach a certain level of compliance. And as you say, I think the smaller fintechs don't have the resources to be able to do that. So you do have to at some point look at the relationship and say, how do we help them get there? We've actually gone as far as recommending a third-party auditor that can go in and look at their entire suite and help them, get their paperwork together to some extent, because the practices are there generally. And in fact, a lot of the vendors that we use have pretty sophisticated, modern approaches to how they build and how they manage and how they monitor, but they just don't document as well. And that shouldn't be the bar, right? I mean, they just, if they could document what they do, they can get there, but they just don't have the focus sometimes. So getting them some help to do that is another way. There are third parties that will go in there and help provide that documentation.
Yeah, same approach from us. Yeah, we are not really willing to modify our vendor, requirements, but we will assist, a fintech or a startup with getting to that point. If they're not willing to put in the effort, it's a hard no.
That's a great approach. It's very novel, and I like that compared to what we've seen in the past. Great to hear that. Another thing that we're seeing on a similar note is various other strategies for getting into the fintech space. We're seeing incubators, these innovation hubs and workspaces. We're seeing partnerships between fintechs and financial institutions. Dan DaCosta, I know that you participated in the Mass Challenge program last year. Can you tell us a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So Mass Challenge is, it actually starts off a little bit different than, most incubators do, where the companies who are looking to engage with the fintechs actually provide what they call a reverse pitch. So we actually come to the Mass Challenge and state what we're looking to accomplish, or multiple accomplishments, which, we based off of our strategic plan. So we came into Mass Challenge, told the group what our company was about, what our values are, and also what our strategic plans were, for the future. And through that process, we essentially get matched up with certain fintechs based off of what type of products that they provide. So it's actually a great forum, because people are actually out there doing the work and finding these fintechs for you, because it can be a challenge. I'm sure everybody can agree with me on that. You go out there looking for a fintech, and I mean, there's just thousands and thousands of different options that are out there, and you're trying to find which one's the right one. But through the Mass Challenge, they kind of help you with that process, but you also do get a chance to view all of them. You get to see them in these quick little 5 to 7 minute pitches, which is great, because you don't have to sit there, wasting an hour on something that you have no interest in. You can see a 5-minute pitch and say, hey, that's something we might want to look at next year or a couple of years down the road, without having to dedicate hours and hours of your time. So I think we saw probably 75 pitches, over just the course of a couple of days. So it was a great experience for us.
Awesome. Now, I mentioned Mass Challenge. I know these exist basically everywhere around the country, certainly in the technology hubs. Jay, do you have anything similar in your region that you could point us to?
Yeah, I don't remember the name of the organization, so I apologize for that. But I was in my earlier response, I was responding to that, where we have close to about a 30-minute pitch that these fintechs come and give us, and they could be based on our past interest or something that we've told them that we are interested in to this organization, and they would line up almost like a speed dating sort of a thing, where every vendor would come in and they would pitch, and we would decide whether we want to pursue more or not. And we would obviously get into our due diligence and understand a little more and double click on each line item and see whether that matches up with our strategic roadmap and so forth. So we've gone through a similar exercise at Columbia. Yes.
Great. Those seem to be working well. So I'm glad to hear that we have a few people partaking in them. Very good. Okay, I'm going to move on to a little bit of a higher level question at this point, focusing more on strategy and culture in the broader sense. Obviously, we're talking mostly with community and regional banks. You've built your brand sometimes for 100 years or 150 years on having that local touch, the connection with your community, personal service-driven brand, essentially. Do you think that the drive to digitize services, to go online, to monetize data, is that in conflict with the brand and the approach that your banks have taken in the past? Is that a valid concern? And whether it is or isn't, what has been your strategy to deal with that potential issue?
Yeah, so I'll jump in. I would say that our goal is to be able to offer basically a channel for that customer, however they feel most comfortable to interact with us. So offer the in-person capability, offer video chat capability, offer the pure digital, pure mobile experience. Give the customers a quick, efficient, simple way to interact with you through the channel that they want to, and don't try to force them into a channel that they don't want to be in. At least that's been our approach. Not only that, but you don't only need to leverage these data tools and these different technologies that are out there just to drive your sales. You can also use them very much so to drive your service. I would say that through the use of our tools, we've increased efficiency, callback times, things of that nature to our customers substantially. So leveraging that technology, such as in the pandemic, we had deployed for previous years ITMs, interactive teller machines, to most of our locations. So when the pandemic hit, we were able to continue offering pretty close to in-person service without the risk of that transmission of that disease. In some cases, you actually have a more personal experience through the technology because that person's sitting right there on the screen in front of you than you do from a tube and a person who's 20 feet away, on the other side of a piece of glass. So it actually can give you an even more personal experience through the use of technology.
Dan Serafin, I know you've been at several different institutions in your time. Do you think this depends on the customer base or on the bank's overall philosophy, or is this what Dan DaCosta described fairly universal?
No, I think it's the former, right? So I do think, the institution I came from, totally different look and feel just from a demographic standpoint, right? So depending on where your demographic is going to decide what your strategy is for both the short and long term. I also think there's a big equation in here in the board of directors at each bank, right? So what's their tolerance for risk? What's their tolerance for being more forward thinking from a technology standpoint in terms of what technologies are going to be implemented and how they're going to be used? And I think it's an evolution, right? Just as our IT organizations are kind of evolving internally from the prior days of worrying about servers and backups and things like that, those are commoditized. The IT organization has become more and more strategic, at least at my bank, and I'm assuming at the other folks as well. And I think those are key factors in deciding the strategy and making sure it aligns with the business.
Yeah, I would totally agree with everything that's been said. And I think you have to be ambidextrous. You can't say either or, you have to say both, and be able to deal with both. And I think, Dan DaCosta, your perspective as far as how that technology can help you provide service, I think that's dead on, and you can actually leverage it for both, for both hands, if you will, both brick and mortar and the digital space. So they're not disconnected. They have to be an integrated strategy.
And I think from our side, Columbia, I'm fortunate enough for my CEO, who has obviously grown through what Dan DaCosta said. He has grown through and become a CEO at Columbia Bank. We obviously being 100+ years bank. So, again, it's very important to understand who your customers are rather than trying to shove them one way or another, offer them all the channels and see which way they want to interact. There's another big thing that has happened in the last couple of years with the pandemic is there was a time when we wanted people to come to digital, which has changed really now, and everybody wants to go digital, even the baby boomers. And what we have also seen is in the last couple of years is things that are called table stakes, right? That I want to do a check deposit or I want to do an XYZ thing, which are table stakes for any bank that's existing. Those are just given. Every consumer expects that those things are given and they're available in your banking application. There are other difficult or more interactive, which is the human-centric, which is around, whether you want to get a mortgage or whether you want to get more of a wealth management advice or other things like that. Those are going to be very human-centric. And so you want to make sure that even though you're focusing on digital, you still have that human-centric side of it, which is still your bread and butter, which is where you're going to get more revenue coming in from. So you do want to do digital, but you also want to make sure you have the human side of it taken care of during your operations and so forth.
Absolutely. Now, I'd like to pull on that strategy thread that a few of you mentioned here. So strategic planning is going to be important. IT for the sake of IT doesn't help anyone, but IT to serve strategy does. So if we could speak a little bit about how involved the IT department or IT leadership is within the financial institution's strategic plan. So not the IT strategic plan, but what is the bank or the credit union itself doing to go to market, to serve its customers or members? How does that integration look? Now, I believe, Peter, you actually teach a graduate course on this, so maybe you can get us started here.
Sure. So we're very data driven around this, and so we look at a combination of value, strategic value, risk or risk reduction, and the monetary component, ROI, and we look at everything that we want to do. So we start out with a strategic plan and strategic pillars, figure out what risks we need to reduce that year, prioritize those, and then take a step back and say, does this make sense? And everybody, we go make sure that everybody's aligned on that. So we try to move forward in a kind of a stepwise, cohesive way through the organization, so that whenever we make a decision on the priority of a particular project or new technology, that there's a good foundation in terms of alignment across the organization, and everybody can say, yes, that's what we want to do, because we realize, we'll never have enough time, we'll never have enough. Well, we can have the money, but we just will never have enough time to do everything. So we have to prioritize, and IT is in the middle with the business, and we are a strategic partner with the business. And figuring that holistic picture out, and I think it really does provide a way for everyone to kind of speak the same language as we go through the year and execute on those strategic initiatives. We're now looking at maybe quarterly adjustments, but at the beginning of the year we do a kind of a big exercise to figure that out, and then have a very clear picture of where we're going. Not even for 1 year, but we do it for 3 years at the minimum.
So you have quantitative scoring on the items that
Yes.
come through and whether they make it. Okay.
Yes, and it's all about communication, right? I mean, and alignment. So, yep.
Does anyone else's strategic planning process look like that, or does someone have something very vastly different than what Peter described?
I wouldn't say vastly different. I'd say it's certainly along those lines, because I think if you're not including technology, in the strategic planning process, then you're not making fully informed decisions about your strategic plan. Because if you don't have somebody in the room that can speak to potential solutions that exist on the technology side, then you're not making efficient decisions, and you could be making a decision to go along a project or a product that doesn't align with other technology that's in place, or maybe there is no API. You can't get access to that data. It's in its own silo, which you don't want to do that. That's not where we are in today's world. You want to make sure that what you're purchasing meshes well with the rest of your technology that exists at your organization.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that, I think we've all been in the room or heard the conversation from specific vendors that say, "Oh, there's no IT involvement needed to implement the solution," right? So we've all been there. So yeah, I think IT is a central cog when it comes to strategic planning. And to Peter and Dan's points, you don't want to go down a path and you end up losing money because you find out that you have to implement, some middle tier solution to get it to integrate with the IT infrastructure, right? We're the gatekeepers and protectors of the IT infrastructure, which makes the organization run. So having that seat at the table, which I do at Savers, is critical to implementing an efficient strategic plan and solutions.
We have
I have no additional comments. I think that the team has covered everything, and our process very closely aligns with everything that has been spoken about in terms of business action plans and how IT can align and how business can align with IT and make sure we are working as a cohesive unit.
Good.
A key component of that is that you have executive and board sponsorship and support, and that's key. I mean, that's without that we couldn't possibly do it. So we have a very strong support from the leadership.
Without asking anyone to speak directly about your current institution or your leadership or your board, has anyone experienced any disconnects like you described, Peter? Has there been any disconnects that you've seen in your career between the board's risk tolerance or executive leadership's willingness to try something new and different that would prevent IT from being as successful as it needs to be in implementing these technologies and these strategies? Have we encountered that, and what's a solution to get beyond that?
So I've seen it firsthand, in not only at the board level and in the executive management level, but with regulators, right? You know, not too long ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago, they didn't know how to take a fintech, API connectivity, things like that, you know, cloud, and I think it comes down to, as Peter noted, communication and education, right? It's up to us as leaders to educate our board members on the direction that we're going and what the technology is about and what it's going to do for the organization.
Yeah.
We do
Yeah,
have,
I would, sorry, go ahead.
just gonna say we have a few questions left and about 10 minutes left. So if anyone in the audience has any questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A box. But otherwise, I'll turn it back over to you, Peter.
Yeah, my experience has been hugely supported by both the leadership and the board, and I think maybe as an industry, I see kind of a trend towards transparent risk, if you will. So you know, there's no such thing as no risk, right? I mean, I think we can agree to that. It's knowing how much risk there is, what's the value, how do you determine the right, you know, weighting to say this is worth the risk and we need to move in this direction. But and having good data, you know, components that help you figure that out. Otherwise, it's just kind of a gut feel, right? And I think that that's no longer the case. Certainly not in my organization. Is that, you know, it is about understanding the components of the data, and they inform. You still use your gut. You still say, does this make sense? Is this, you know, is this the right thing for us to do? But you know, having that transparency helps people be more aligned, and actually protects you when you make decisions, right? Because it's not one person's gut feel that says we got to go in this direction, and you know, if you're wrong, if their gut is wrong, you know, how do you know that? You don't, you know, if you have a kind of a data-driven approach where we can all agree in increments and steps, then I think we can make decisions with you know, clear-eyed, you know, data-driven approaches.
One of the questions too that becomes important, I think, is when you get into those discussions, what's the risk of doing this? What's the risk of implementing that? Well, what's the risk of not doing this? And the risk of not implementing that? And that can unstick things sometimes when you turn the question around that way.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. One last item I'd like to get everyone's thoughts on here, because this is really a key point of this entire series in the summit, but it's about developing leaders. IT, I think, as you alluded to, it used to be more transactional and more of a service. It was to keep the servers on, the things that have become a commodity. In order for institutions to be successful, IT needs to have this leadership role that we've been discussing. Not leading IT, but leading the bank or the institution at a strategic level. Looking beyond yourselves, how do you go about developing leaders amongst the people in your organizations to not be a server admin, but to be an IT leader at some point in the future? What's your strategy there? How do you create IT leaders at your banks?
It's a really good question. I can jump in on that. And one of the things that we do is we when we talk about technology, we talk about the business value and the customer value and service value. And so every conversation really has to be, you know, kind of grounded in that perspective. And then there's the technology. How do we do this, right? It's the what first, and then the how. And making sure that everyone understands that, you know, the why we're doing something, and how to translate that into and show that you're actually providing value. So engaging younger folks, and I went through this myself. I started as an engineer, got thrown into the middle of that, you know, and it's, you realize it's people, right? Technology sort of becomes secondary after a while. It's core, but you really have to think about, you know, what motivates people, how can you get them to be passionate about something. I do see it. There is a lot of really, really strong technical talent that also has the passion to deliver that I think is great.
I think I can chime in here. Some of the things that I have really observed in this organization, as well as other organizations that I've been working with, everybody wants to work, right? It's also a matter of, are they stuck in a rut for years together? What is that motivates them? Being able to spend some time with them. Today, in our organization, or in general, any organization, there's always lack of time. And when we take a look at, okay, we're going to review someone, or we're going to spend some time with, we set up weekly or twice a week meetings with different folks in the organization who report up to you. Many times people are not able to make it. And that's a demotivation for some folks. But taking an active interest in what their likes, dislikes, what motivates them, and then following up and giving them solutions and helping them, guiding them, would really get their buy-in and help them move from one point to another. The more people you move from one point to another, the more successful you're going to be, the more motivated they're going to be, and help the organization. And I think that's probably the best strategy to motivate people and bring them on board to your mission or whatever it may be.
And it's not always the most technical people that make the best technical leaders. I think that it's extremely important that communication becomes a part of the hiring process when you talk about, wanting to hire someone who's a technical leader and can communicate to the rest of senior management and the board effectively about what needs to occur, within the organization. If you have somebody who, comes into a board meeting and talks about APIs and, different protocols for 45 minutes, you're going to have a lot of people sleeping at the table. You have to have somebody who can bring that information and explain it in a way that it makes sense to everyone at the table.
Yeah, and my process during the recruiting, Dan just noted it. I look at how the individual fits into the organization and not necessarily the technical skill. That's important, but do they have that ability to learn it, right? What are their communication skills? And then I like to free up my team, give them something to do, give them the project, and let them know that I trust them to get it done. Putting people out there and just letting them do things is how they grow. And from that, they gain leadership skills, whether it's meeting with department heads or individual department managers on resolving a solution. Organizing those meetings and working throughout the organization is how you change IT individuals or IT leaders into organizational leaders.
Very good. Sounds like we're all of a similar mind here, that it's more about people and the person's intrinsic leadership abilities than it is about any technical ability. And trying to figure out both how to teach them the technical side of it, to marry those two together. But like you said, Dan, give them a chance. Let them lead a project, give them a chance to fail. They'll be ready to catch them. Excellent. Excellent. Well, we are just about at the end of time. If anyone has any last second questions, feel free to plug them into the box. But barring any of that, I want to thank all of our panelists again. I thought this was good discussion. And just as our final question, we went from the technical side to the organizational side very quickly and spent a lot more time on that, which is, I think, part of the interesting components here. This will be recorded and available, so a lot of that technical stuff, if you want to circle back to it, we'll be able to do that. But thank you to Peter, Dan, and Jay. Certainly, this was an interesting discussion. I really appreciate you joining us today, and hope to have further discussions in the future.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
Thank you.
With that, I will